Before I carry on with what could loosely be described as a series, I want to raise a particular issue which can be both a huge help and value in anything of a spiritual nature, but also the biggest of stumbling blocks, and leading one off on all sorts of wild goose chases and quite possibly a lifetime's worth of delusion. And I think, if we want to genuinely make sense of our spirituality and genuinely want to move towards a greater understanding of it and of our existence and of our place on this planet, then we need to use it, but in a realistic way. I'll try and explain. It's natural, I think, that we look for things that explain or satisfy certain questions or needs that we might have in a simple way, in a way that is fairly instantly helpful or apparently helpful. And I think also that we tend to be attracted to people who seem to know what they're talking about, even if what they're talking about is outlandish or ultimately completely nonsensical. In the sort of broadly spiritual world, there are some extremely wise, insightful people. Most of those don't tend to force their opinions on you or their conspiracies on you. They just offer clues and ways of looking at things, and I think that it's often quite a good barometer. But anyway, those who go down the conspiracy route are often leading themselves right up the garden path. Also, as are those who desperately want to know and understand things which we simply cannot at this point know. Also the tendency to make solid certain speculative notions that are misleading, or I'm trying to avoid being specific here. Let me try and illustrate in a different way. People on the autistic spectrum, as far as I see it, are not disabled, they are differently abled. So there are some aspects of the way that they look at things which seem disabled, because they don't fit in with a normative view of the way life is. But on another level, they have an ability, and I said it's an unfortunate term in this sense because autism covers a whole range of different things and different gifts, but can perceive things of this nature often in a far more accurate and realistic way. Unfortunately, because they're often labelled as disabled, people tend not to want to listen to them. I'll give you a specific example about an autistic person. I can't remember his name, but he's well known. He has a pretty much photographic memory, in a vast sense. He was taken on a helicopter over London once, and he drew a picture, an accurate picture of all the buildings that he saw in that very brief period. He could retain that information and the interconnectedness between all these different buildings very easily, something which most of us would think is a complete and utter possibility and must have been fraudulent, which it wasn't. While that might not seem in itself like a spiritual story, it just gives hopefully an understanding of how the autistic mind can see in a much more expansive way and retain information in quite a different way and examine information. I think it's important that we use our own imaginations to take us further and deeper into our spirituality and what it might mean and what it connects us all, and all the sort of questions that spirituality itself raises. I think we need to be really, really careful that we don't end up in some fantasy land where we present as fact things which aren't at all. You know, if you want to believe something, who am I to stand in your way? But to state these things are facts, it's ultimately fraudulent. We need, in the world that we live in, if spirituality is to retain any credence or to have any serious impact, to find ways of debunking spurious beliefs of our own, of not clinging to fondly held ideas that make us look like fools, nor interpreting spirituality as simply a feeling, because it's so much more than that, so much more than that. Imagination can serve as a springboard to leaps of ideas and concepts. It can be immensely creative. It can lead us into places that we've never been before. Without imagination, nothing new would ever have happened. We would still be living in caves. It's an absolutely vital element of being human. But it's also something which means that we can present as a concrete reality something which we've simply conjured up out of our imaginations. We need to be discerning. We need to appreciate that constant questioning of ourselves in this way is important. Well, it is if we don't want to lead ourselves into a complete fantasy land. And I think that this does no favours whatsoever to those of a spiritual nature, because they then appear to those who are not, or who are looking at it from the outside, as a bunch of lunatics. I think ultimately the ideal is to have imagination and to use that imagination, because it's there for a reason, in balance with the desire for truth and therefore a critical eye. If you're not seeking truth, you're just seeking to placate yourself or to feel that things that you would like to believe are true, then you may well not end up with anything that can possibly hold water. Now, if you want to believe things that aren't true, then that's entirely up to you, if it makes you feel better, but it is a security blanket against reality. And that, I think, is the danger of spirituality, that it can end up being a security blanket rather than a journey into truth.